office to relocate this situation. That'll be great to you.
I know that Senator Baumgartner, unfortunately, is kind of, he has a prior engagement that he has to get to. Senator Baumgartner, please.
Yes. Marvin, I was curious about us competing as the state of Washington and various NEOs for companies from Canada. And I was curious as to, for example, comparing a company coming from maybe California to a Canadian company. Are there some commonalities as we compete for that business, or is it dependent just on individual enterprises?
Most of all, thanks for the question. It's more dependent on the individual business. What we see mostly, and Dave can chime in, is that they're looking for a footprint in the U.S. and they're looking to grow their U.S. market share. Very, very interested in our area. We're close to the border. Very interested in Washington State. They understand what our tax structure is. It makes sense to them. They've done a lot of analysis of the population here, where they could, continue to distribute products and looking at services. Right now we're working with a company that's global, and they're in Canada. They're not even in British Columbia. They're actually in Montreal. And so as we continue to expand our marketing presence, that's really important, but we have to get the word out, and the way that we can get the word out is to maximize the resources that we have and leverage our funding.
And this question to maybe all of you, one of the big challenges that the legislature are working on is the issue of talent here in the state of Washington, and of course the situation with higher ed and training the proper workforce to meet folks. Another challenge we have here is with our infrastructure in this state. And I guess I'm just curious as to kind of a relative comparison in terms of comparing where the state needs to do more in terms of talent versus infrastructure for scarce state dollars.
Great question. It's not an either or, of course. In economic development, we talk about foundational needs that you, in order to even be in the game, you have to do certain things, if not very well. Infrastructure and workforce training are two of those foundational requirements to even be in the game. States that don't measure up well against the competition, because it's always relative, right? Everyone's in the recession, or most states are in the recession, so they're suffering to one degree or another. To the extent we can maintain first our existing infrastructure and also build those things we've been promising ourselves, and I'm including us in this, that we're going to build for, in some cases, 2 or 3 decades. Highway 167, for example, that's my favorite example, to the Port of Tacoma. We need to follow through on those commitments, and I think every community will have one, and probably one that's obvious, but maintenance and then appropriate expansion of the system. I'm using transportation just as the most obvious example of infrastructure. On the workforce side, here's what we hear from companies, and so if I had to choose, I'd be, maybe it's 49-51. The 51 is workforce, because that's what companies say to us first and last, in our case, in almost every meeting we have with them, whether they're looking to come into Washington State for the first time or they're here now and trying to grow. How can you tell me how I know I can get qualified people for the jobs I want to create here, and then also retrain or train incumbent workers that are already here on new technologies, etc. And it runs across the gamut, whether someone's running a warehouse or they're hiring a CFO or an electrician. Same question all the time. Now, in a recession with a relatively high, and it is good news, Senator Cass and I, we were all pleased to hear about the unemployment rate going down a bit. Even with a relatively high unemployment rate, companies are still finding it difficult to fill skilled positions in their organizations. And so the state's commitment, and I know there's some bills you're looking at right now in the aerospace area, that's fantastic. We need to do that in some other areas as well. But absolutely, if what we're hearing from companies is workforce quality, not quantity. Don't send me 100 people to fill 3 positions if they're not already pre-screened and qualified and can actually do the job and show up on time, etc. So 51-49, workforce takes it by 2%.
Well, Dave, you were on to page 2 before we just had this little brief interruption. If you'd like to continue, please do.
I think